Under the frozen silence of an Alaskan morning, an old veteran and his golden retriever trudged across the glittering ice near the edge of a forgotten village. The man's breath fogged in the cold air, his weathered hands gripping a wooden walking stick as the loyal dog sniffed and pawed restlessly at the frost. For days, the dog had returned to the same spot, barking and digging as if something beneath the ice was calling him. When the veteran finally knelt to look closer, he heard the dull metallic clang echoing from below, a sound that didn't belong in nature. Within hours, neighbors gathered, their faces pale in the daylight, as the dog unearthed the corner of a corroded steel crate stamped with the faded insignia of the U.S. Strategic Command, 1962. No one spoke, but every heart knew one thing. Whatever lay sealed inside that frozen box had been meant to stay buried. The morning after the discovery, frost still clung to the branches like shards of glass as Raymond Cole, 64 years old, a retired U.S. Army engineer, stood beside the frozen pit his dog had carved into the ice. His breath came out in slow white clouds, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his wool cap. The golden retriever, Max, paced anxiously around the edge, tail swishing through the snow, letting out short, impatient barks as if urging his master to act. Raymond's life had quieted into solitude after the war. Just the old cabin, the distant mountains, and Max, who had been his companion since his wife passed. But today, the world felt heavy again, like it had when he wore the uniform and orders carried secrets. He crouched near the exposed corner of the metal crate, brushing away frost with his glove. The steel was pitted with age, but the stenciled letters were still visible beneath the rust. U.S. Strategic Command, 1962. That date sent a pulse through his memory. 1962, the year the world nearly ended in silence when missiles waited in the dark. He remembered the drills, the fear, the faces of men who thought they might not see another sunrise. He ran his fingers along the edge of the crate, and for a moment he could almost hear the hum of generators and the static of old radio chatter echoing through time. Max whimpered softly, pawing the ground, as if he too sensed the ghost that had just awakened beneath the ice. Raymond called for help over the radio, a small handheld set he used for emergencies, and within an hour, Sheriff Tom Miller arrived with 2 deputies and a local historian named Claire Bennett. Claire was in her 40s, tall, wrapped in a navy parka, her red hair tucked beneath a fur-lined hood. She had spent years documenting abandoned Cold War sites scattered across Alaska, remnants of a time when every mountain hid a listening post or a supply cache. As she knelt beside the crate, she glanced at Raymond, her breath catching. "You realize what this could be?" she said quietly. Raymond nodded. Something that should have stayed buried. They cleared more snow until the crate's entire top was visible, the surface warped and sealed with thick bolts corroded from decades of cold. Claire photographed every angle while the sheriff paced nearby, his boots crunching over the ice. "If this is military property, we need to call the state," he muttered, but Raymond shook his head. "By the time they get here, the thaw might flood the pit. We should at least make sure it's safe." He spoke like a man who had opened things far worse before. The sheriff hesitated but eventually nodded, motioning for one deputy to fetch tools from the truck. As they worked, Max sat close, his head resting on Raymond's knee, eyes fixed on the crate. The veteran scratched behind his ear absent-mindedly, whispering, "Easy, boy. We're just making sure no ghosts come crawling out." The first bolt came loose with a loud snap, echoing across the valley. Birds startled from the trees, their wings scattering snow like powder. Raymond exchanged glances with Claire. She seemed both fascinated and uneasy. "You think it's ammunition?" she asked. Raymond exhaled slowly. "If it is, we'll find out soon enough. But after 60 years in ice, whatever's in there could be unstable." They removed the last bolt, and the lid groaned as metal scraped against metal. A sharp, metallic smell filled the air. Cold iron and oil mixed with something old, something that didn't belong to this century. Inside the crate lay several cylindrical canisters wrapped in tar-coated fabric, their surfaces etched with faint serial numbers. Among them, a rusted metal box sat wedged between two shells, its lock half-eaten by time. Raymond's heart thudded as he leaned closer. The handwriting on a faded tag caught his eye. It wasn't printed military code. It was handwritten in ink, trembling but clear. For retrieval, only by Major R. Cole. He froze. His name, his rank, his past staring back at him from 6 decades beneath the ice. The sheriff's voice broke the silence. "What the hell does that mean, Ray?" But Raymond didn't answer. He just stared, his hand trembling as he reached toward the tag, memories flashing like the flare of old artillery. Faces, orders, promises. Max barked once, sharp and loud, his breath misting into the pale light. In that frozen moment, Raymond knew one thing for certain. The past had finally found its way back to him. The wind swept across the valley, carrying the echo of Max's bark long after it faded. Raymond knelt by the open crate, his gloved hand trembling over the tag bearing his own name, as though time itself had folded to mock him. Sheriff Tom leaned closer, squinting. "You sure this isn't some kind of coincidence?" he asked, but Raymond shook his head slowly, his voice rough and low. "No. During the Cold War, I was stationed at Fort Greely. We oversaw emergency caches, ammo, rations, prototype munitions. I never thought any of them were buried this far north." He paused, eyes narrowing. "But none of the crates was supposed to carry my name." Claire crouched beside him, her breath visible in the cold air. "Major Cole. Could this be something classified? Something that was erased from record?" Raymond didn't answer. He was staring at the cylindrical shells, each one sealed, each marked with a radiation warning faintly visible beneath the frost. His stomach tightened. He'd seen these before. Tactical warheads, small, portable, meant for detonation in case of invasion. The kind that weren't supposed to exist. The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a young man named Parker, swallowed hard and stepped back. "We should call the state, maybe even the feds," he said. But the sheriff lifted a hand. "Not yet. If this is what it looks like, we need confirmation before word spreads. The whole town will panic." Raymond nodded absently, still studying the crate's contents. "He's right," he said quietly. "If these canisters are active, even exposure could be dangerous. But something tells me they weren't meant to detonate. They were meant to be found." Claire frowned. "By who?" Raymond exhaled, his gaze drifting toward the mountains, where the sun glinted off the ice. "By someone who remembers. They covered the crate with a thick tarp to block the wind, then gathered inside Raymond's cabin, a modest wooden structure built from pine logs and decades of solitude. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth as they shed their gloves, their faces still pale from the cold. On the table, Claire spread old maps she'd brought, showing defense lines and supply routes from the 1960s. "This area wasn't supposed to host any major installations," she murmured. "But there were rumors of black site operations during the Cuban Missile Crisis, test zones for containment and quick deployment units." Raymond nodded slowly. "Back then, the orders were simple. Dig, bury, forget. We did our job, and time took care of the rest. But if this cache has my name, someone left it for me, or for whoever I became." Max lay near the fireplace, tail twitching as if he sensed the unease. Every creak of the floorboards seemed louder than usual, every gust of wind like a whisper of the past clawing at the windows. The sheriff rubbed his temples. "Ray, I've known you 30 years. You're not the kind of man who rattles easy. So tell me, what do you think's really down there?" Raymond stared into the flames, his voice quiet but heavy. "Back in '62, we ran an experiment with low-yield warheads designed to self-neutralize after 20 years. They were prototypes. I helped design the fail-safe codes. That crate shouldn't exist anymore. Either it never deactivated, or someone reactivated it." The words hung in the air like smoke. Claire's eyes widened. "You mean this could still be live?" Raymond nodded grimly. If the containment's intact, maybe not. But if the ice cracked the seals... He didn't finish the sentence. The sheriff stood abruptly. All right, nobody says a word outside this cabin. We'll contact Anchorage discreetly. Get a bomb squad here before the story leaks. But before anyone could agree, a deep rumble shook the floor. Cups rattled. Max jumped to his feet, barking toward the door. Raymond was out first, stepping into the blinding snow. The pit had sunk slightly, steam rising where the crate had been buried, a faint metallic hiss breaking the silence. The ice was melting, fast. He rushed forward, heart pounding. The air around the crate shimmered faintly, like heat above asphalt. Radiation, or something worse. The sheriff shouted for everyone to stay back, but Raymond didn't move. He felt a strange pull, not of curiosity, but of memory, as if the cold steel below was whispering his name again. Max barked, circling him anxiously, his golden fur glowing under the pale sun. Raymond looked down into the mist, seeing his reflection over the crate's surface, an old soldier facing the sins of an era no one wanted to remember. It's waking up, he murmured. And somewhere beneath the cracking ice, the faint click of a mechanical timer began to count. By the next morning, the world outside Raymond's cabin no longer felt still. A helicopter's distant hum broke through the mountain silence as a team from Anchorage descended onto the frozen clearing. Men in heavy suits with radiation badges moved swiftly, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Sheriff Tom met them first, his face drawn and sleepless. "The crate's right where we left it," he said, voice low. "But it's leaking heat. We heard ticking last night." The lead specialist, a tall man named Dr. Simon Harland, adjusted his visor and looked at Raymond. "You're Major Cole?" he asked. Raymond nodded, the title sounding foreign after so many years. "You helped design containment units like this," Harland continued. "We'll need you to walk us through what we're dealing with." Raymond hesitated, then reached for the map Claire still held. "This wasn't meant to be a storage crate," he said, tracing a trembling finger along the faded layout. "It was a fail-safe pod, meant to neutralize or destroy sensitive material if compromised." Harland frowned. "Sensitive material meaning what? Warheads?" Raymond met his eyes. "Or secrets. Sometimes both." As the technicians examined the crate, Geiger counters clicked steadily, the sound unnerving even to seasoned ears. Max stood beside his owner, growling softly as if sensing the unease pulsing beneath the ice. Claire watched from behind the safety line, her camera lowered for once. "He knows something," she whispered, watching Raymond's expression harden. The old soldier's mind was turning, recalling blueprints, old directives, men whose names were erased from history. In 1962, we were told to hide proof of an experimental weapons program, miniaturized warheads with encrypted triggers. They called it Project Ember. I thought every unit was dismantled after the treaty. Harland knelt over the crate's open lid, flashlight beams slicing through frost. If this really is Ember tech, it could still contain plutonium traces or micro-reactive cores. "You said you designed the code locks. Can you deactivate it?" Raymond's jaw tightened. "Maybe. But there's something else in there, a compartment underneath. The tag with my name. Someone wanted me to open it." They cleared the snow around the lower section until a secondary hatch emerged, sealed by an old rotary mechanism. Raymond crouched beside it, his breath shallow. The engraved numbers were faint, but he remembered them. Sequences burned into his memory decades ago. Slowly, he began turning the dial. 21 left, 14 right, 6 left. A soft click echoed. The air grew colder somehow, heavier. As he lifted the small latch, the compartment revealed not explosives, but a stack of weathered envelopes bound by a steel clasp. Each was marked "Eyes Only, R. Cole." Raymond's hands trembled as he opened the first one. Inside were photographs, black and white images, of test ranges, soldiers standing beside strange cylindrical devices, and, in one photo, a younger version of himself shaking hands with a general. Beneath the photo was a short note. "If you're reading this, the project survived you." Sheriff Tom took a step closer. "What does it mean, Ray?" But Raymond couldn't answer. His eyes darted to the next page. A typed briefing that described unregistered caches distributed across the Alaskan frontier, each capable of automated activation in case of breach. Claire covered her mouth, her voice barely a whisper. "You mean there could be more buried under these mountains?" Harlan's face went pale. "If those systems fail, any dormant payload could leak or ignite. We need immediate evacuation." The deputies began shouting orders to seal off the area, while the helicopter pilot radioed for backup. But in the chaos, Raymond just stared at the documents, feeling the weight of guilt crush his chest. All those years ago, he thought he'd buried Duty beneath the ice. Yet Duty had never forgotten his name. As the sun climbed higher, light glinted off the frost-coated steel, and Max suddenly barked again, loud, sharp, urgent. Raymond turned toward him, just in time to see a thin stream of vapor escaping from one of the canisters. The air shimmered like heat, even in sub-zero cold. "Back!" Harlan shouted, grabbing his arm. "It's breaching!" But Raymond's gaze locked onto the final page in his hand, a handwritten line scrawled across the margin. "If the containment fails, follow the dog. He knows where the next one sleeps." The message made no sense, yet in that moment, Max's frantic movements didn't seem random anymore. Raymond's heartbeat thundered in his ears as realization dawned. This wasn't an accident. Max had been leading him all along to something far greater and far more dangerous. And as the snow began to melt in wide circles around the crate, the veteran knew the Cold War hadn't ended here. It was only waking up. The helicopter's blades whipped snow into a storm of light as emergency sirens blared faintly through the mountain air. But Raymond heard none of it. His gaze was locked on Max, who stood facing the distant ridge, ears perked, tail stiff, every sense alive. The golden retriever growled low, then barked once, short, commanding, as if calling his master to follow. Dr. Harlan shouted over the noise, "We need to contain this site now. We can't risk another breach." But Raymond's instincts as a soldier had already taken over. He strapped on his weathered gloves, slung his old field pack over his shoulder, and started toward the ridge. "Where the hell are you going?" Sheriff Tom yelled. Raymond didn't stop. "If there's another cache, we need to find it before the thaw does." That box wasn't warning us. It was leading us. Max bounded ahead through the snow, his golden fur a streak of light against the white wasteland. Claire hesitated, then grabbed her camera and flashlight and ran after him. The sheriff swore, motioned to Harland to hold the perimeter, and followed. The climb was slow, steep, and breathless. The wind sliced across their faces, carrying the dry sting of ice. Raymond's legs ached, his old injuries reminding him he wasn't a young officer anymore. But the dog didn't stop, not even to rest. He led them along a narrow ravine where ancient trees bowed under the weight of snow, their shadows stretching like fingers. "What's he tracking?" Claire asked between breaths. Raymond's voice was low but certain. "Memory." She frowned. "Memory?" He nodded. "Dogs remember places, smells that linger for years. I trained him near here when he was a pup. The army built a relay outpost nearby, long before the locals knew it existed." The truth unsettled her. "You mean there's more military ground up here?" Raymond's eyes were hard. "There was, and if the notes are right, what's buried here makes that crate look like a toy." By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a frozen valley. The ice below was cracked, uneven, and glowed faintly under the sun. At its center, a circular depression was visible, as though something massive had once pressed up from beneath and then settled again. Max stopped, whining softly, then began pawing at the edge of the circle. Raymond knelt, brushing away snow. Beneath, he found a hatch, steel, old, with the same insignia, U.S. Strategic Command. But this time, the letters beside it read, "Central Armament Vault, Access Restricted." Claire gasped. "This can't be real?" It's like a time capsule. Raymond ran his glove along the edge, feeling the vibration under the ice. It's still powered, he whispered, after 60 years. The hatch was locked by a mechanical wheel frozen solid. The sheriff crouched beside him. "We're not opening that without equipment," he said. Raymond's lips thinned. "We won't need to." He reached into his pack and pulled out an old key fob, olive green metal, worn smooth from decades of disuse. "I kept one fail-safe," he muttered, pressing it against a small indentation near the hatch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, the ground shuddered. Gears ground beneath their feet, ice cracked and hissed, and the hatch began to lift with a deep metallic groan. A gust of stale air poured out, carrying the scent of rust, oil, and something electric. They stepped back as the light from above filtered in, revealing a dark tunnel descending into the earth. The walls were lined with frozen conduits and rusted signage. Authorized personnel only. Claire raised her camera, but her hands were shaking. My God, this place was never recorded in any archive. Raymond stared down the tunnel, his expression hollow. Some ghosts never wanted to be found. Max barked twice, tail low, eyes fixed on the darkness. The sheriff sighed. "We go down there. We better be sure it's safe." Raymond glanced back at him, a grim smile crossing his face. "Safe ended the moment we opened that first box." They descended slowly, flashlights sweeping across the narrow passage. Frost clung to the railings like crystal veins. After 50 steps, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. Metal catwalks, half-collapsed crates, control panels buried under dust and ice. At the center stood a row of large containers, identical to the one they had found above, each marked with the year 1962. But one of them, larger than the rest, was cracked open, wires spilling out like veins. Claire's voice quivered. "Ray, this isn't a vault. It's an arsenal." Raymond's jaw clenched. "No," he whispered. "It's a grave." He moved closer, brushing frost off a control console, revealing a red light still blinking faintly, decades after it should have gone dark. He turned toward the others. This place was designed to sleep forever, but something woke it up. And as the low hum of power echoed through the chamber, Max began barking again, this time facing a door in the far wall where faint warm air was escaping, as if something on the other side was still alive. The metallic echo of Max's barks faded down the corridor, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the steel floor beneath their boots. Raymond raised his flashlight toward the sealed door where warm air was seeping out, fogging the frost-covered walls. "That sound," he muttered, stepping closer. "It's power, still running after all this time." Sheriff Tom followed cautiously, one hand on his holster, though bullets meant nothing against ghosts or machines. Claire steadied her camera, her voice trembling. "This shouldn't be possible, Ray. Nothing stays active for 60 years in this kind of cold." Raymond's eyes, shadowed by memory, didn't leave the door. Unless it was designed to wait. He gripped the frozen handle and pulled. It resisted for a second, then gave way with a loud crack as ice shattered and steam hissed outward, filling the passage in a wave of warmth that smelled faintly of ozone and rust. They coughed as the vapor cleared, revealing a small control room bathed in the orange glow of emergency lights that flickered weakly against the gloom. The room looked frozen in time. Monitors cracked but still glowing faintly. Paper files stacked neatly beside an ancient coffee mug. And in the center, a console still humming, its green screen pulsing with words no one had expected to see. Automated defense protocol, active, awaiting authorization. Major R. Cole. Claire gasped. "It's asking for you." Raymond stepped forward, his reflection trembling across the dusty glass. His hand hovered above the keyboard, but he didn't touch it. "This system shouldn't even recognize my credentials anymore," he said quietly. "It's like it's been waiting. For me." The sheriff frowned, scanning the blinking lights. "You telling me this thing knows who you are?" Raymond exhaled, his voice tight. During the Cold War, we designed these sites to remain dormant until a verified command key, voice, fingerprint, or manual code, reactivated them. But this one's running on legacy power. It means someone reprogrammed it to stay alive. Max paced near the doorway, whining softly, his nose twitching toward a desk in the corner. Raymond followed his gaze, moving slowly until his flashlight landed on a metal locker bolted into the wall. A thin layer of frost cracked as he pulled it open, revealing a stack of reels, sealed envelopes, and an old reel-to-reel recorder with a label reading Site Commander, Cole Adrian Hensley, Final Directive. With trembling fingers, Raymond pressed play. The machine crackled, then a voice, distorted, weary, yet commanding, filled the room. If you're hearing this, the failsafe has been breached. The Cold War may have ended, but the ghosts of our defense will never rest. We built these caches not just for war, but to remember who we were willing to become. Major Cole, if you're alive, you know why this message is for you. Raymond's jaw clenched. The others exchanged uneasy glances as the recording continued. You were the only one who questioned the orders, the only one who refused to arm the Ember units for full yield. They called it insubordination. I called it humanity. I buried this site myself, left it to the ice, because I believed one day you'd return to finish what you started, to shut it all down. The tape clicked, then silence. Raymond stood motionless, eyes glassy, the weight of 6 decades pressing against his chest. The sheriff finally broke the silence. So this place, it's one of yours? Raymond nodded slowly. Partly, but I thought Hensley dismantled it after the armistice. He turned toward the console again, reading the flickering line of text still waiting for his command. If I enter my clearance code, it'll either deactivate the system or trigger the purge. Claire stepped closer, whispering, What does purge mean? He looked at her, his voice calm but hollow. Detonation, the entire valley. The words hung heavy in the stale air. No one moved. Even Max was still now, watching his master. Raymond exhaled, closing his eyes. But if I don't, this system could awaken every other cache across Alaska. He placed his hand on the keyboard, fingers trembling over the worn keys. Adrian trusted me to end this, he said quietly, and maybe it's time. Claire shook her head. Ray, there must be another way. You don't even know if the cores are active. They're active, he interrupted softly. I can feel it. The hum, the heat. It's not dead. The sheriff gritted his teeth. So what's the play? Raymond looked toward Max, who sat silently by his feet, eyes steady and knowing. We follow the protocol. He typed in his old authorization number, RCOL 1962. The console beeped once, then displayed a single line. Manual confirmation required. Biometric. Raymond pressed his thumb against the scanner. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a deep vibration rolled through the floor, and lights across the chamber flickered to life, revealing corridors stretching deeper into the earth. The console blinked again. Secondary vault online. Awaiting inspection. Raymond's breath caught. It's not over, he whispered. Claire's flashlight swung toward the far end of the control room, where a heavy door slid open by itself, releasing another gust of warm air. Beyond it lay another staircase, spiraling downward into darkness. Max stood, ears forward, and barked once, clear, urgent, commanding. Raymond stared into the black below, a chill running through him that had nothing to do with the cold. He's leading us again, he murmured. And as he tightened his grip on the flashlight, the old soldier felt a truth rising inside him like a slow dawn. The real secret of Project Ember was still waiting to be found, and it was calling his name from the depths. The air grew thicker as they descended the final staircase, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the dark. Frost dripped from the ceiling in long, shimmering threads, and the orange emergency lights flickered in weak pulses, as though the bunker itself was struggling to breathe. Raymond led the way, flashlight trembling in his grasp, his breath coming in sharp bursts that hung like ghosts before him. Behind him, Claire and Sheriff Tom followed silently, their eyes darting between the shadows. Max moved ahead, confident and purposeful, pausing every few yards to glance back, his brown eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The staircase ended at a reinforced door, thicker than the others, its surface stamped with words that chilled even the hardened veteran. Project Ember, Final Test Facility. A keypad blinked faintly beside it, coated with ice. Raymond stepped closer, brushing frost away with his sleeve. "This is it," he murmured. "The heart of the program." He placed his hand against the metal. It was warm, almost alive. Adrian always said Ember wasn't just a weapon. It was a message, he said softly, as though speaking to himself. A way to prove that man's greatest danger was never the bomb, but his belief he could control it. He typed in his clearance code once more, and the door gave a deep metallic groan, sliding open with reluctant force. Warm air poured out, thick with dust and the scent of oil and age. Inside, the vast chamber glowed with an eerie amber light. Cylindrical tanks lined the walls, cables hanging like veins, monitors long dead except for one screen still pulsing with faint green text. In the center of the room stood a massive steel pod, its outer casing cracked but still intact. Max barked once, circling the pod, then sat beside it, tail still, head bowed, as if he understood the gravity of what lay before them. Raymond approached slowly, his flashlight sweeping across the faded markings. EM-01, Prototype Core. He whispered the words like a prayer. The sheriff took a cautious step closer. What exactly is that thing? Raymond's face was pale, his voice barely a breath. It's the first Ember unit, self-sustaining, AI-assisted warhead, designed to think, to decide. We shut it down before activation. At least, that's what we were told. Claire's voice quivered. Are you saying it's alive? Raymond shook his head slowly. Not alive. A machine that never forgot its purpose. As if responding, the monitor behind the pod flickered to life, displaying a single line. System integrity. Operational. Awaiting command. Major R. Cole. The sheriff swore under his breath, but Raymond stepped forward, his expression resolute. It's been waiting all these years. Adrian must have reprogrammed it to listen only to me. He wiped the dust from the console beside the pod, revealing a small microphone and a keypad beneath cracked glass. The screen blinked again. Enter directive. Raymond hesitated. If I activate this, it could trigger a purge. But if I don't... He looked around at the others. It'll wake on its own eventually. The failsafe's degrading. Claire shook her head, voice breaking. Ray, we can't let this place go up. You'll take the whole valley with it. He looked at her, eyes calm, distant, as if he had already accepted something. Sometimes the only way to end what we started is to let it end with us. Max whimpered softly, pressing his head against Raymond's leg. The veteran knelt, resting a trembling hand on the dog's golden fur. You always knew, didn't you, boy? You led me here so I could finish it. The dog's tail thumped weakly once against the floor, a quiet farewell. Raymond rose, turned back to the console, and typed his old command string, END62. The screen blinked twice, then displayed, Directive confirmed. Countdown initiated, T-minus 300 seconds. A soft hum filled the chamber, rising into a low, resonant tone that seemed to come from the earth itself. Red lights flared along the walls. Claire screamed, Ray, what did you do? The sheriff grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit. Move! But Raymond stayed behind, his figure framed by the pulsing red glow. He placed his palm on the pod, whispering, It's over now. Rest. The hum deepened, the air growing warmer as steam hissed from the vents. Max barked once, ran back toward Raymond, and pressed himself against his leg. The old man smiled faintly, tears glinting in his eyes. Good boy, he murmured. You did your duty. Outside, The mountain rumbled as the bunker began to collapse inward, snow and smoke rising into the pale sky. The blast never came. Just a single, distant boom swallowed by the valley, followed by silence. When the dust settled, only a thin wisp of steam drifted upward from the ridge where the vault had been. Days later, rescue crews found Claire and the sheriff alive, shaken, but unharmed. The lower levels, however, were gone, sealed by the avalanche. Near the entrance, half buried in snow, they found a single dog tag and a leather collar, still warm from the sun. The tag read, R. Cole, U.S. Army, 1962, and beside it, paw prints in the snow leading toward the horizon, fading into light.